Hi everyone, Scott Lewis here for Wirefly. Today I'm here to bring you a cell phone schmackdown between Motorola's DROID RAZR Maxx HD and Samsung's Galaxy S3. Before we get started on our schmackdown, I wanted to point out there's a couple different versions of both of these phones. The DROID RAZR HD comes in the DROID RAZR HD and the HD Max, and the Galaxy S3 comes for all the major US carriers, and there's even an international version of the Galaxy S3. The biggest difference between the international and the US version is the processor. It is a quad-core processor on the international version, where this model here for T-Mobile is the US version, obviously, and it has a dual-core processor. Now, the main differences between the RAZR HD and the HD Max would be battery life. The 3,300 mAh battery is here in the RAZR Maxx HD, where the regular RAZR HD has a 2,530 mAh battery. Besides the battery difference, there's a slight difference in the thickness of the phone because of the battery, and then there's a difference in the amount of storage that you get. The RAZR Maxx HD comes with 32 GB of onboard storage, where the regular RAZR HD comes with 16 GB of onboard storage. So with the Max you get a little bit longer battery life and more onboard storage. With the differences out of the way, let's go ahead and get our schmackdown started. Now, it's going to be 3 rounds today. Round 1 is going to be about design, round 2 is going to be about the cameras on the phones, and round 3 is going to be about specs and benchmarks. So let's go ahead and dig into round 1, the design round. Now you'll notice that the displays on the phones are very similar in size and clarity, and that's because they're almost identical. The RAZR Maxx HD has a 4.7-inch diagonal Super AMOLED display with screen resolution of 720 by 1280, which gives it an overall pixel density of 312 pixels per inch. While the Galaxy S3 has a 4.8, so it's 0.1 inches bigger than the RAZR Maxx HD, and it's also a Super AMOLED display with screen resolution of 720 by 1280. Because it has the same screen resolution, but it's slightly larger, it's going to have a slightly smaller pixel density, so it's 306 pixels per inch. The difference in the screen resolution, though, and the clarity isn't noticeable. Both of these screens are very vibrant and very crisp Super AMOLED displays, and you come to expect that from a Super AMOLED display. One of my favorite design aspects of the RAZR Maxx HD is the fact that it has an internal nano coating over all the internal pieces and components inside that makes it splash resistant, and I think that's something that should be in all smartphones today, given the price that people are expected to pay and how long they're expected to last. Now, you can get some different cases for the Galaxy S3 to make it splash proof or waterproof, but the RAZR HD Max is coming right out of the box with a splash proof design. I also like the design on the RAZR HD Max because of the metal bezel and also the Kevlar back. So the Kevlar back doesn't scratch, it's very nice and it feels very good in your hand. And it also has NFC technology built in, or near field communication technology, which allows you to use it to make purchases at retailers by entering your PIN into your phone and tapping it at the register. Now, the Galaxy S3 also has NFC technology, but as far as the physical design, it has a plastic outside case and it has the kind of a plastic or metal looking brush on the plastic, so it looks kind of metal, but it is still a plastic, so it's not quite as durable as the Kevlar back on the RAZR Maxx HD. But one thing I will say about the Galaxy S3 is that the plastic outside doesn't have a cheap feel. It's a very solid feel. So just because it has a plastic outside cover doesn't mean that the Galaxy S3 doesn't feel like a very high quality phone. Next up, I want to talk about thickness. The overall thickness of the DROID RAZR Maxx HD is 9.3 millimeters, where the Galaxy S3 is only 8.6 millimeters. The overall weight of the RAZR Maxx HD is 5.5 ounces, while the Galaxy S3 is only 4.7 ounces. So there's not a huge difference of total weight. Now, both phones have a very solid feel because of that weight. They're not necessarily too heavy or too thin. They have a very good feel and feel very solid and sturdy in your hand. We talked a little bit about battery earlier when we were talking about the differences, but the RAZR HD Max is a 3,300 mAh battery, while the Galaxy S3 has a 2,100 mAh battery. While the extra battery life on the RAZR Maxx HD is a good benefit, I'm not sure how big of a benefit it is. If I'm still going to have to plug it in at the end of the night because it won't make it through an additional day, I'm not sure that I'm really that far ahead. So while it is a benefit, I'm not sure how big of a benefit it really is. After looking at everything in the design round, round 1, our winner is going to be the DROID RAZR Maxx HD. With the displays being very similar, in thickness, total weight, and battery life not being a huge difference between the phones, I think the overall feel of the Kevlar back and the metal bezel in the splash-proof nano coating outweighs the benefits to the Galaxy S3 in having that slightly smaller profile. So let's go ahead and move on to round 2. Round 2 is going to be about the camera in the Maxx HD and the Galaxy S3. Both phones have very similar cameras. They both have 8 megapixel rear-facing cameras. Now the Galaxy S3 has a 1.9 megapixel front-facing camera, while the RAZR Maxx HD has a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera. So a slight advantage to the Galaxy S3, but unless you're really into video chatting or Skyping, that's not a huge difference. So let's go ahead and take a look at some sample photos, and we'll tell the winner for this round through those. Let's go ahead and take a look at our sample photo. This first photo is just outside of our Wirefly campus here. Now we use the regular standard single shot mode, and as we can see them compared side by side, personally I like the Galaxy S3's picture a little bit better. I think it's brighter, and I think the colors are more accurate. And picture 2 is going to be a sample photo taken from the same location, but in HDR mode. Now HDR mode stands for high dynamic range, and it should take a crisper and clearer picture in low light settings. So out of the pictures that we took in the HDR mode, I like the DROID RAZR Maxx photo a little bit better. I think the colors came out brighter, I think the colors are more accurate, and I think it shows better definition in some of the objects in the photo. So those were our sample photos from the Galaxy S3 and the DROID RAZR Maxx HD. So I think with the camera specs being so similar, and the fact that I like picture 1 from the Galaxy S3 and picture 2 from the DROID RAZR Maxx HD, I'm going to go ahead and call round 2 the camera round a draw. So let's go ahead and set up round 3 real quick with a recap. Round 1 went to the DROID RAZR Maxx HD for design. The camera round was a draw, so the Galaxy S3 really needs to step it up in round 3, which is going to be about specs and benchmarks. Let's go ahead and start with specs. They're both running a 1.5 GHz dual-core processor. That's a Snapdragon S4 processor. The RAZR Maxx HD has 1 GB of processor RAM, while the Galaxy S3 has 2 GB of processor RAM. And they both have versions that are available in 32 GB of onboard storage or 16 GB of onboard storage. And they both have a spot to expand memory with a micro SD card. So through the specs, the Galaxy S3 has a slight advantage with 2 GB of onboard storage versus the 1 GB of onboard storage that the RAZR Maxx HD has. So let's go ahead and run our benchmarks to see if the 2 GB of RAM actually gives the Galaxy S3 an advantage. So we're actually going to run a quadrant standard benchmark and an Antutu benchmark. So we're going to go ahead and find those real quick. So let's run our quadrant standard benchmark first. And we're going to run a full benchmark. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off now so I don't waste your time, and we'll pick it up at the end of the quadrant standard benchmark. So it looks like our Galaxy S3 is wrapping up with the quadrant standard benchmark, and it is. Let's go ahead and pull up the score. Now the Galaxy S3 did start just a second ahead of the DROID RAZR Maxx HD, so it's okay that it finished first. Now the Galaxy S3 had a score of 6,164, while the DROID RAZR Maxx HD had a score of 5,456. Just a quick reminder that the quadrant standard benchmark and the Antutu benchmark are going to test the same things. There's 4 categories. It's testing the CPU, the GPU or graphics processor in the phone, the memory in the phone, and also the read-write speed to the onboard storage of the phone. So it does make sense that the Galaxy S3 has a slight advantage because of the 2 GB of onboard storage versus 1 GB on the DROID RAZR Maxx HD. Let's go ahead and run through the Antutu benchmark real quick. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off, and I'll pick it up at the end of the Antutu benchmark. So both phones just finished up the Antutu benchmark. The DROID RAZR Maxx HD has an overall score of 10,561, while the Galaxy S3 has a slightly higher score at 11,087. And similar to the camera round, with both of the specs being very similar, we had to default to the test, and the quadrant standard benchmark and the Antutu benchmark went to the Galaxy S3. So our overall winner for round 3 is the Samsung Galaxy S3. So overall that makes our Schmackdown today a draw. The DROID RAZR Maxx won the design round, round 2 the camera round was a draw, and round 3 went to the Galaxy S3. So if you're trying to decide between these 2 great phones, I'd say it comes down to personal preference, and you really need to ask yourself 2 questions. Do you like the design better of the RAZR HD Maxx, or do you like the design of the Samsung Galaxy S3? And the next question comes down to software. They're both running Android 4.1.1, but the user interface that's overlaid on top of that is quite different. The RAZR Maxx HD has a very stock and basic user interface that's very similar to the true Google experience you get on like a Galaxy Nexus. While the Samsung Galaxy S3 has TouchWiz user interface, which is highly customizable, and Samsung's doing a lot of nice things to make that particular user interface very valuable. So if you're trying to decide between the RAZR Maxx HD or the Galaxy S3, make sure to ask yourself those 2 questions, design and software. Now both of the phones are available on Wirefly.com. Make sure to check out our great price. And that wraps up our Schmackdown for today. My name's Scott Lewis for Wirefly. Thanks for watching.